All right, can I call up the activators? So the year 1 program we call Innovate. The year 2 program we call Activate. To give you some context, when we built TKS, we built it to be a 1-year program. And so the year 2 program is not a required continuation of the year 1 program. The year 1 program is actually fully complete in and of itself. The year 2 program was just something we saw that there was a subset of students in the year 1 program that they really wanted to learn more about the world and about themselves. And so there was just so much demand from last year that we said, okay, let's create a program based on what they wanted. And so for the students that really fit the type of curriculum that we built, we accepted those students into that program. And so it's a very, very different program. And so I want to start with Shugin, Tommy, and Brianna. And I want you to kind of hear their story from, okay, 1 year in TKS, right? That's kind of what we just saw right now. Well, how does that evolve in the 2nd year now, in the 2nd year of the community, in the 2nd year of that mindset? And so I'll start with you, Shugin. Tell us a little bit about how you were thinking about yourself, the world, and your main learning points in the 1st year, and then what happened in the 2nd year, and what kind of, actually I'll get to what we did later, but maybe just focus on you specifically and your mentality and your personal growth.
Yeah, so at the 1st year of TKS, I was a completely different person. And I can't even recognize myself, the person I was a year ago. And that's so crazy to me because that just shows me how much I've grown from the 1st year. So just to give you some context, in the 1st year, Naveen and Nadeem and TKS exposed us to exponential technologies, and then we actually build the technology. So I chose to focus on artificial intelligence. And my first initial thought is that I can't even do this. I was reading a research paper and I was like, I don't understand any of the math. But what I did is that I kept persisting on and I learned the math. And I actually didn't know any programming before TKS. So I actually taught myself programming to actually build different machine learning models. But even in the 1st year, I had extremely low confidence. My mentality was that for my future, I'd probably be an accountant or something because both my parents are accountants. And I can't even believe that I thought of that before because that's just so crazy to me. Now, just fast forward to the 2nd year, my ambition is actually to create my own billion-dollar company that impacts 1 billion people. And the reason that that's my ambition is because I have just developed so much confidence through the past 2 years of TKS. And that's been from working on difficult problems within machine learning, debugging for 3 weeks straight to actually my artificial neural network actually working. And also working on consulting projects with TD, Google, Microsoft, Walmart, Wealthsimple, and Interact, and actually presenting to them. Another thing is that I was super shy of presenting. So my first ever presentation at TKS, yeah, Naveed's laughing because it was super bad. And my first ever presentation at TKS, I was presenting on my machine learning models. And it was actually at, I think it was at Scotiabank, their digital lab platform. And I remember presenting, and after Nadeem came up to me, and he was just like, "You look like you were going to poop your pants." And I legit looked like I was going to poop my pants when I rewinded the video later. But then I just kept on working on my presentation skills because I was like, I just want to kill this presentation because upcoming last summer, I actually presented at Microsoft's Inspire conference in Las Vegas. I was like, I just have to kill this presentation. So I kept on practicing, more practice, more practice, more practice. And then when I got on stage, I just had so much fun. And actually, at the end of the presentation, I actually got a standing ovation. And I think that's when I really had to turn. Yeah, I think that's when my mindset shifted that there's so much that I can do. I'm such a smart person. I never thought of that before. So yeah, so that's been a complete mindset shift. And from that, we at TKS and Activate, we also learned about different mindsets. And one thing that we really practice is gratitude. And something that I've been feeling is my happiness level has just skyrocketed through the building right now because I've to give you some backstory, my whole life I've moved 14 different schools. So and I'm 16 years old, so I've never really had any close friends. But then in TKS, like, this is the first time where I felt like I really had a family. Like, I have like older brothers, I have like sisters. Like yesterday I was talking to like Talha and Samarth, who are some of my really good friends in TKS, and we were talking about how to create a better culture, how do we improve in TKS, how can we be better versions of ourselves, and we were just giving each other more positive feedback for us to grow, because essentially TKS is just one big family where we want like everyone else to grow with us. And I can like basically hit up anyone in TKS to ask for advice, or they can ask me for advice. So it's just one huge family, and that's just like one example of how much that has added to my personal happiness. So like TKS is like amazing. I don't even know like who I would be right now without TKS. And like I'm sure you can tell from hearing from the Innovate panel, from hearing from like Liam's presentation, like Zaina's presentation, that we have grown so much, and like any kid can do this, because the person I was before TKS is, I see a lot of these people within my high school, and I see so much potential in them to grow as much as I did, and as well as the other kids in TKS. So yeah.
I'm actually really surprised she talked for that long, because she lost her voice yesterday. To give you a little bit of context, she was interviewing an astronaut that was in space.
On a panel, that was crazy.
And then after, she had like a bunch of interviews back to back with like Global Mail and stuff. And like I thought you just weren't going to talk that much. So that's awesome. Tommy's story is a little bit different. He's in grade 12, and he's actually going to share something really exciting that happened in the last few weeks. But I'll let you talk about your story before you drop the bomb.
Yeah, so a lot of people will tell you in TKS, I started out a couple years ago as a pretty average high school student, sort of trying to impress my teachers, get into the schools, put stuff on my resume. And when I joined TKS, I got exposed to all these cool technologies. And in particular, I got really excited about quantum computing. And so a couple months in, one of the first things that happened to me was we got to go down to San Francisco to visit a company called Rigetti. And Rigetti is probably one of the leading companies in the entire world in the quantum computing space. They work on the hardware, the software, and actually Brianna was on the trip as well, and we got to talk to Chad, the CEO. And Chad gave us some advice. The two things that he told me that really stuck with me for the year were, first, he said, follow your heart and figure out what you're really passionate about and do that. Do things that you care about, which was vastly different from anything that I had been told before, because it was always about impressing my teachers and getting the good grades and stuff like that. And the second thing he told me that really stuck with me was that people will always tell you that things aren't possible or that you're wrong, and then the thing that changes that is when you actually go out and do the thing that's different from anything that they could have imagined. So basically, he said, follow your heart, and then don't be afraid to be bold and take risks that people are advising against, because they only know what's possible within their own realm of experience. So I spent the rest of the year trying to follow that advice, but still trying to uphold, my grades, and I wasn't really willing to take that leap to let go of, what that could mean for my future. So I was trying to kind of balance both things. And what I found throughout the year was I started getting all these really interesting opportunities that actually had nothing to do with grades. So for example, I was working with IBM at their research headquarters in New York on quantum computing at their hackathon. And then that kind of led into other things. I started speaking at conferences in San Francisco, Texas, at South by Southwest. And all these things started happening, and none of it had anything to do with what I was doing in school. And so that kind of made me start to realize, maybe what Chad was talking about starts to make a lot of sense. So I actually set up another call with him a couple weeks ago, just to kind of follow up. This is actually about a year exactly from when we had our first conversation. And I wanted to follow up with him and say, hey, this is kind of what I've been doing. I've been trying to follow your advice and see where that gets me, and this is what I'm thinking about for next year. And I told him I was thinking of going to U of T for an engineering program. And he told me that he was concerned that going to university would actually slow down my learning. And that kind of surprised me because what I told him was I was worried, long term, if my dream, which it was to work at Rigetti, 5-10 years down the road, like that was where I wanted to be. And what he told me was he's actually worried that going to university for 4 years would actually slow me down a lot. And so that's actually when he decided to hire me on the spot for the whole year. And so now I'm working there full time as a quantum engineer. So my takeaway from that sort of experience over the past couple of years has mainly been it's easy to talk about taking risk and to be bold, but it only really matters if you do it in practice. And so it requires two things, I think. You have to have a willingness to fail. So knowing what the possible outcomes look like and knowing, what's really the worst thing that could happen. I mean, if you ask anybody in TKS, you can be pretty sure that most of these people will never have a problem with finding opportunities in their lives. Everybody's going to have an amazing life. So knowing that that's going to be a really good direction regardless is the first thing you have to be aware of. And then the second thing is you just have to take a leap of faith. Like that was what was holding me back throughout the entire year was I was never willing to take the leap and kind of let go of doing things for other people. And so it takes those two things, and if you can do that, that really puts you in a good position to take advantage of all the things that are going to come up in your life. Steve Jobs, there's this quote, I think it's one of my favorite quotes he has. He says, "You can never connect the dots looking forward, but looking back on your life, you'll always see how, all the mishaps and all the weird random spins on things, all that led to your happiness and your prosperity." And so I'm really looking forward to, in 5, 10, 15 years from now, looking back on this moment and seeing how this kind of fits into my journey.
Yeah, so working at Rigetti at 18. What the heck? Like, most people who work in the quantum computing space have at least a decade of experience. Like, he's almost close to, like, a decade in age. What the, like, what? So for me, just to give you some more context about who I was before TKS, I was, again, like a pretty average student, except I had a lot of arrogance, actually. In school, you actually get a positive reinforcement whenever you do something that aligns with their kind of cookie-cutter system of, okay, you're a good student and you're not a good student. So if you get high 90s, then you get the positive reinforcement. And over time, if you get more and more of these positive reinforcements, you start to have this haughtiness that you are super smart and that you know everything about the world already. And so entering TKS, when I started to have more of these experiences and learn about different technologies and also start working with companies, I was really humbled. I realized that I really don't know anything. And from all of the students that I know in my school, they also really don't know anything. And so this kind of gave me a mindset transformation where I decided, okay, instead of focusing on everything that I already know and like giving myself more positive reinforcements of how I'm such an amazing, smart person, why not instead focus on growth and trying to find all of the areas that I'm not so great at and instead working on those. And I remember one conversation with Nadim in particular when we were talking about which focus area or which technology I really wanted to go deep into. So I was super excited about quantum computing as well, except, again, people who work in quantum computing have at least a decade of education. So I thought, well, how in the world could a 14-year-old girl possibly be able to start learning about quantum computing? Like, this just has never happened before, and it's not possible. So Nadim and I were discussing about how I felt about me going into quantum computing, and I said, well, I can't do it. Like, I'm just not smart enough to actually start learning about this technology. Maybe when I'm 30, I'll be able to land a job in quantum computing, but not right now. And he told me, well, Brianna, why don't you just try to do it anyways? So for the next couple of months, I started looking into quantum algorithms and trying to implement them by myself. We also had that experience at Rigetti where we actually got to meet Chad and start working on real quantum computers and see one right in front of our eyes, which was really exciting. And there was this one meeting that I had in particular where I was reading a quantum machine learning paper on a normal Saturday night. And I had a couple of questions about it, so I emailed the CEO of Xanadu. And Xanadu, for some of you who don't know, they're a photonic quantum computing company in Toronto. And they're working on some really crazy and insane things within the space. So I emailed him, and we actually have a meeting. 5 meetings later, which basically consist of me talking to him about how excited I am about quantum computing, what I'm learning, and what I want to do in the next 10 years, he gives me an internship. And I thought, well, wow, only from 5 meetings of developing a relationship with somebody and also just putting on a lot of effort into this new technology that a couple of months ago I thought I would have never been able to learn about, I can now start working at a quantum computing company and just learn immensely from people. And so from that experience especially, going back to this point of arrogance, I realized, wow, I don't know anything about quantum computing compared to what some of the leading experts do. And that was another humbling experience where, again, when you look at some of the top kids in your class who are getting these 98s and who really think that they're smart, and you put them in these real workforces where they actually have to work with other people and meet standards and do their jobs appropriately, you're like, okay, I'm not actually as smart as I really thought I was. So that was one of my main takeaways from being in Innovate. Just having this humbling experience, but also kind of getting rid of this self-limiting mindset that I had initially where I thought I couldn't do a lot of things, and now it's just a number, which is age, and I can't actually do a lot of these things.
And she's being humble right now, so she's leaving out parts of her journey, but she's also now working at Sanctuary AI, which is probably the world's leading authority on artificial general intelligence this summer. So let's give her another round of applause.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what actually happens in TKS. Like, what actually happens in Innovate? What are the actual sessions like? And what actually happens in Activate, and what are the sessions like? We can talk a little about velocity, because it doesn't just happen, right? Tommy's going to be moving to San Francisco to work at Rigetti full-time. Brianna's going to be moving to Vancouver by herself to intern at Sanctuary AI. Like, I'm pretty sure I was like, parents of the audience are thinking, I would not let my kid just like move to another city without me at this age. But it's a lot of the things that we do in TKS prepare these young people to mature very, very quickly, right? So let's talk a little about what you actually do in the program. So maybe we'll start with, Shagun, why don't you talk a little bit about Innovate and what the Innovate sessions are like? Why don't you talk about velocity and what velocity is, Tommy? And then why don't you talk about Activate and what Activate's like? And then you guys can kind of add on to each other where needed. So don't feel like you only have to talk about your thing. Cool?
Yeah, so Innovate's amazing because we get exposed to all these technologies that we had no clue about. So each session is that we learn about new technology like quantum computing, brain-machine interfaces, genetic engineering, artificial intelligence. We just don't learn about the technology. What we really learn about is the application of this technology. What can this technology be applied to that can change the world? And I think that's a great mindset to learn from, because it's not just about building the technology or researching deeply into how this technology works, but actually how this can be applied to impact billions of people's lives. So each session we learn about a new technology, and what we actually do is that in the Innovate session, when we learn about technology, Naveen and Nadeem tell us that, okay, now you have to research about this technology and by yourself learn new information and present it to your cohort. And in TKS, we have 4 cohorts. But what's so crazy is that we have to do this in the span of 1 hour. So you can imagine how daunting that is. And I remember my first year in TKS, I was literally stressing. Like, I was a stress ball. I had huge sweat pits. I was like, oh my God, what am I going to do? In 1 hour, I have to present on quantum computing. I don't even know what quantum computing is. What was really amazing is that actually trained the skill of being uncomfortable and putting ourselves in uncomfortable situations. Because if we were always comfortable, if we were always given a week in advance, we would not be situated and we would not be prepared of how life really works. Because learning from Nadeem's experience working at McKinsey, I remember him telling me this all the time, that when he worked at McKinsey, whether he was given 30 minutes, 1 hour, or even like 20 minutes, he always got the work done. So we just had to put ourselves in the mindset that, okay, we're given 1 hour to learn about quantum computing, its applications, and now present on it and build a slide deck. All right, we just got to do it. And that skill just compounded and compounded until we just became better at doing challenging things that were given to us and being uncomfortable. So that was a bit about what we do in like the first Innovate year.
So velocity is, for those of you who don't know, it's an opt-in part of the Innovate program where you're able to, well, if you think about, the meaning of the word velocity, it's direction and it's speed. And that's actually exactly kind of what the program is aimed at doing. So the first part of it, direction, comes from learning about all these other things that are sort of added onto the Innovate program. So you learn about, you have a person of the week where you study someone like Ray Dalio or Charlie Munger or some of these really influential leaders who have, really valuable mental models or lessons that are really useful in coming up with sort of your direction and also helping find your ambition. And then the second part of that is accelerating and really going as fast as possible down that track, sort of barreling towards your ambition. And to do that, you kind of study these other tools like philosophy and stoicism and all these other things where you're just accelerating your growth through this path that the TKS is taking you on. And so TKS, or velocity, is the combination of finding that direction, finding what you want to do, and then doing that in an accelerated fashion.
How I see Activate is more so, like the purpose of Activate is really to start understanding the world and then also try to understand people. So I remember I have a couple of experiences where I really started to internalize what empathy means and what it means to connect to another person. And growing up, I felt like I couldn't really connect to people when they were being super emotional. For example, when my friend, she would come up to me and she'd tell me about how her mom's moving away and how she's really sad and she doesn't know what she's going to be doing in the next 2 months without her mom. And I was just kind of confused. I was like, okay, so your mom's moving away. Well, this is just reality. You just kind of have to deal with it. And so I was like 14 years old and I told her, sorry, just deal with it. Like, this is just reality. And for a girl who was actually crying in front of me, opening up about what she felt insecure about in the time, I was a very bad friend, and I'm surprised she remained friends with me. And so in Activate, we actually start to meet different people from different walks of life. For example, we all had this organized trip where we went to a homeless shelter. And all of us in that homeless shelter, we started to talk to people about some of their experiences and how they're feeling right now, what is their situations. And from those types of conversations, you start to gain this understanding of people. And how Naveed likes to put it, which is a really great analogy, is that everybody kind of lives in their own different fishbowl. And so what's really valuable is to hop into different people's fishbowls to really understand how they think about the world and how they feel about the world. And then at the right time, you want to take yourself outside of that fishbowl. There's this one conversation that I had with this man in particular, and I just remember feeling this immense amount of sadness for his situation and how he felt. And it was the first time that I felt so sad to the point of actually like crying for the person. And so going back to this point of Activate being the perfect program to really start to understand the world and also to understand people, I started to gain the skill of empathy, and I'm still trying to hone on the skill and try to be able to connect with different people that I haven't been able to connect with before. Another really important realization that I had with, it was with Ria and Ananya. We went to this Minister of Innovation event where basically Navdeep Bains, he invited us to give him some feedback on how we should approach technology in the next decade and how we should approach making Canada a more innovative landscape. And at the time, I really saw like relationship development as something very transactional. I'm going to talk to this person just because I want to potentially allow you to give me some opportunity in the future. That's how I saw relationship development with people who weren't my friends. We were sitting at a round table with Navdeep Bains and the CEO of CIBC. And the CEO of CIBC then asked Navdeep Bains this question. He says, well, what is something that you don't like about your job right now? And from that question, Navdeep Bains starts opening up about his kids and how he feels like he doesn't get to spend a lot of time with his family and how it's actually affecting his personal relationships. And I was just like, wow, I never thought that these two people who didn't really know each other would just start opening up about their insecurities and vulnerabilities right on the spot at this roundtable discussion. And that's when I realized, okay, maybe I should completely change how I think about approaching relationships. For the rest of that day at that event, I decided I want to really start to understand how people think about the world and how people come to their own decisions. And this also relates to another discussion that we had in Activate about emotion versus logic, where we kind of say that there's kind of a spectrum of how people think and come to their own decisions, where maybe emotions on one side and logic is on the other side of the spectrum. And so people, they might feel through the world, and other people might just think about things in a more rational way through the world. And being able to understand this fact of this is actually how people think about things, and this is how people come to decisions, and then being able to put myself in the shoes of somebody who thinks more emotionally about the world, I tried to apply that to some of the conversations that I had at the event, at this Minister of Innovation event. And it was pretty amazing to come from that event and be like, wow, I actually developed some of the most valuable relationships that I ever have before. And even though these people, they're in their 30s and they're working at some of the top-notch companies, like the president of KPMG, he's in the audience right now, he was there. And talking to him about some of his experiences and how he feels about the things that he's experiencing was just really insane to think that this was actually what relationship development meant. Relationship development wasn't transactional. It's actually just trying to have this understanding of another person. So that was a really eye-opening moment for me in Activate. And I think Shugan can talk more about how we start learning about different philosophers like Marcus Aurelius and Plato. And I know that Shugan, she really resonated with some of these philosophers. Maybe you can expand on that.
Yeah, definitely. But first I want to go back to your point about empathy. So as Brianna said, we all went to a homeless shelter for the purpose of building empathy and trying to empathize with different people. And I actually had an amazing conversation with this one guy. And he told me that he's 60 years old, and for the past 58 years of his life, he didn't know that he had multiple personality disorder. And he only learned about it in the past 2 years. And that was so crazy to me, because he said that these past 2 years of my life is when I actually was the most happy. And that, like, the underlying meaning of that was that when you actually understand yourself, if you understand what's wrong with you, what you like, what you dislike, you can really find happiness through that. And that's so important, to actually understand who you are as a person. And he was telling me that because he didn't know what was wrong with him, he actually went through depression because he didn't realize why he felt certain things, or why his actions caused disagreement between his relationships and actually broke relationships. And one thing that we really focus on in Activate is understanding yourself. And it's been life-changing for me, because personally, innately, for me as a person, I'm a super emotional person. And this is the year that I actually tackled being emotional as a person and trying to be more logical. I also realized that I depended heavily on other people for happiness. And one thing that I learned was that, how do I be happy within myself? How do I be happy just myself without relying on other people for happiness? So that was a huge part of Activate, because what we do is that we have these discussions of what is the mindset of the week and who's the philosopher of the week. How do their philosophies apply to us particularly? So that was an amazing experience for me, and that's just one example. There's so many different kids in Activate who have so many stories relating to empathy, relating to learning about different philosophies that have impacted their life significantly. So that's one aspect.
Do we have time for another one?
Let's speed up a little bit. I want to close it soon.
All right. So I'll go quickly through this one, but I have another story from actually my time in Velocity before I joined Activate. And one week we had been learning about Plato and the Allegory of the Cave. And up until this point in TKS, I was actually a pretty arrogant person, actually. I thought that I had collected a fair amount of knowledge about the world, and I thought I understood how things worked. And I think a lot of young people kind of go through this sort of phase where they're learning a lot, and it kind of feels like you're developing a good understanding of how things work, and then at some point in the road, your worldview kind of stops applying to everybody, and you realize that you don't actually know anything. And so that's kind of what happened to me here, where I learned about the Allegory of the Cave. And I won't go too far into what that is, but essentially the implication of it is that nobody really knows anything. Nothing is actually knowable, and the things that people operate on a day-to-day basis is actually just a collection of their experiences that have influenced them throughout their lives. And so it was kind of terrifying to me that, you know, all the things that I thought I knew were actually not knowable, not only not knowable, but not even true. And so I went through this period for like several months actually, where I was just kind of like terrified of like not being able to know anything and not being able to operate on like a set of values or a set of fundamental truths about the universe that just doesn't exist. And so what I started to realize was I kind of use this analogy of an explorer. And explorers sort of, you know, going on this journey, whether it's an analogy for life or whatever, they don't fear what's ahead of them in their journey. There's a ton of ambiguity and a ton of unknowns if they're, you know, wandering into a cave or something. But they don't fear what's going to be around every corner. And so I realized like everybody's operating on something. So what is it that allows people to move forward? And I realized that you actually just have to embrace the fact that your future isn't actually knowable. The fundamentals of reality aren't actually knowable. And you can be confident in that. And you can be confident in your ability to sort of let the reins kind of take you where they will and then figure it out as you go. And so that was kind of my transition through you know, arrogance to complete humility, the other extreme, and then figuring out how to sort of have confidence even in situations of ambiguity and unknowns. So, yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.